Hi, I'm Andy Beachy, Director of Adventure Serve Ministries, and I'm living in a shack for 5 days, living with less so that others might have more, raising funds for Adventure Serve Ministries, as well as raising awareness on issues of homelessness, substandard housing, an aspect of the clients that we serve in the summer months. And I am meeting today with a good friend, Dr. Brian Hall. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you're about, where you're at?
Brian Hall, I teach youth ministry at Asbury University. I've been around youth ministry for a little over 25 years now. Hard to say that out loud, but it's true. And so I lead a youth ministry and teach it and live it and love it too.
That's pretty impressive after 25 years. There's a lot of professional youth pastors out there that it's tough to stay in. I think the average. What is the the stats? Youth ministers average in it about a year and a half or 2 years before they get burned out.
Actual average is around 4 years for tenure for a full-time person. But the temptation is large to step out early. But,
that's one of the things I've been impressed by with Adventure Serve, how we have many groups where it is a professional youth pastor that's been at it for 20 years and that kind of youth ministry where the kids are coming back as they are in college and then older and then and just the great impact if you can stay in it. And that also, of course, takes a church that is committed to sustaining their youth pastors economically and quality of life and stuff too.
And just a commitment to youth ministry, period, which is really important. And unfortunately not as strong as we would love it to be in every church. So
exactly, it's the heartbeat, but it's often not where it get the dollars.
Right.
Well, talk first about our connection. How do you know of Adventure Serve? Because you go way back, actually, when you were youth minister.
Yeah, so when I was a youth pastor, I used Adventure Serve. I worked with them, and we partnered. We took a couple trips down to Tennessee a few years, and part of what I loved about Adventure Serve even then, it's still the case now, is the ways that they take seriously the preparation for groups before they come, and the ways that they try to set youth groups up well through Adventure Serve's long-term partnerships in communities and relationships in communities. So when I bring a youth group, when I come, then we can have conversations with people because they trust Adventure Serve. They don't know me, but they trust Adventure Serve, and they know that Adventure Serve is gonna do the right thing. And so that kind of level of relationship and partnership, true partnership, is what's mattered the most and really attracted me in the first place and continues to be really important to me and what you guys do.
Yeah, there's some youth ministries that it sometimes can work if you've got a youth pastor that's effective at it, but it's pretty complex to run your own missions trip where you're like, okay, contacting the needs and coordinating the needs, but to have an organization that
and it's important, to do, I think, mission well means to really care about people and partner. And so that means not bringing what I think they need, but the relationship. And again, that's what you guys are able to provide with your long-term relationships, to really listen and know what somebody really needs, not just what we think they need or we want them to need sometimes. And so that level of partnership is really important. And again, the setup, the ways that you guys take seriously the need for a group to prepare themselves well to come. So there's a spiritual preparation, there's of course a logistical preparation, but there's also some skills and those kinds of things. And you guys have great resources and talk about that and encourage that and value that. And that's so important.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've appreciated about our partnership over the years is Asbury students that you send our way, internships, and the other thing, because we've had a few of your students doing internships for a semester and plugging them into camp ministry. And then something else that you do is, and I think it's very unique and a hard thing for youth ministers to find, and that is through your Thursday lunches, where you talk just briefly about what that is and why. And
so once a month we just try to gather all the youth leaders who are interested in the greater Lexington area to come to campus, and we provide a free lunch for them in the cafeteria. Spicy Chicken Thursday. But it's great because it's just an opportunity to get together, pray together, share ideas, and just commit to kind of caring for each other. There's something about youth ministry that just to be honest, lots of people get ministry, but youth ministry is a unique thing, and so it's nice to be with people who really get it.
It's amazing how many youth pastors just find themselves kind of like a lone wolf and don't have, maybe it's because there's denominational lines that they can't reach across or whatever in their community. And so it's so important that all over that youth pastors find brothers and sisters that are also doing youth ministry to lean into.
That networking is really important, and especially, youth pastors new to an area. We've got a couple guys that just moved in the last couple months to this area, and so it's nice to be able to provide a place for them to come and make those connections and know they're not alone.
And then out of that, I know that there's been some multi-church events, like a 30-hour famine that was coordinated through the relationships that you created there, and that's fabulous. Tell me a little bit about your experience taking youth on mission trip, not simply domestic or through Adventure Serve, but in other ways, and the importance of why spending the time and money to get a group of kids for a week somewhere to do this.
Yeah, there are a couple things that I think are really important in that, and lots of people have been doing mission trips for a long time. Not all of them have been doing them, I think, as well as they probably could. And so one of the things that's important for us is to understand first that it does help expand a young person's world, right? So one of the questions, the best teachers are the ones who ask the best questions. And so Jesus, of course, was a master teacher. But one of the questions that comes up in Scripture is, who's your neighbor, right? And that question we answer, all of us have an answer for. But as we go on these kinds of trips, all of a sudden our world gets bigger, and the answer to that question changes in ways that are really formative and helpful. So we begin to see the world not just in my little scope of things, but I begin to understand there are needs bigger than me, and so I gain perspective on life, on what matters, what doesn't. But I also begin to understand and see how God's at work in all those places, not just in my backyard, but God really does care and is present in those places. And that begins to transform a life, not just for a trip, but really for a lifetime. And those are the things that's one of the pieces we think is really important. The other piece for us is helping young people really begin to see God in those places. There's a temptation to think for a lot of us, all of us probably, that what people need is a life like mine, And so there's a temptation to think that my life is somehow better, even if we don't say it like that or mean it in a derogatory way, but that's sort of our approach.
It's human nature, right?
Yeah. But helping young people in particular begin to see that God is present in those places where they might go on those trips. So with the impoverished or with people who are seemingly struggling with great need, to be in those places and just pay attention and hear from God and experience Him in those ways. And one of the things that a lot of times young people are able to do in these kinds of trips is be ministered to in the midst of that they're serving. And so those are the kinds of places where all of a sudden we begin to understand a God who's much bigger, and a God who isn't just in the nice fancy church, or not that everybody who goes on a mission trip is from a fancy church, but that God's not just where we are, but God's in those places too, and in people who are different than me, who have different experiences than me. And that just challenges everything about our worldview, about our life, and ask us some questions about what God may be calling us to on a larger scale. And so, of course, we also see youth oftentimes struggle with vocation a little bit, and just starting to walk through that process of discernment. What does God have me do? And how do I mission whatever with the gifts that I have? And for some, that is a full-time ministry kind of call.
That didn't get sparked till then.
Yeah, one of the stories...
I want to get to some stories but that kind of puts some practicalities on these concepts.
So there was a kid in our youth group, a giant of a man. He was a huge kid. He played football. He was great at football. He was a great family, a Christian family, cared a lot about faith and church, and he grew up really well, but he often couldn't go on youth stuff because of football. So summer was always football camps and football academies and all this, and because he was so gifted, he got invited to some great opportunities, and so he could never do mission trip with us. And finally, his senior year, he had received a full ride scholarship to Notre Dame to play football, and he's like, Mom and Dad, look, this is my last summer, my last chance. Can you just let me skip this one camp so I can go on this mission trip? I've always wanted to do this. And they're like, sure, you can go this year. Kind of got all the rest of that stuff locked up. And so he went on this mission trip, and just God met him in an incredible way, right? And just met him in those places of serving and in those places of caring for people. And he saw a need that he had never imagined. He'd read about, he'd heard other people talk about, but just to be in it. And God just transformed his life right in that 1 week. And he came back and he said, Dad and Mom, what if I pursued this with my life?
Wow.
And you can imagine, I mean, as a parent, you're a parent, I'm a parent, we want the best for our kids.
Yeah. There's no money in that.
Yeah, the future, but, and it wasn't an easy conversation, but I was proud of his family and the way they handled it. But he began to just say, look, this is where God's leading me. This is what I'm created to do more than football or anything else. And so you have moments like that, and that's not every kid for sure, but you have moments like that where God gets a hold of somebody, and it took that experience, not just reading about it, but living it and meeting people and those kinds of things for him, that imagination to be sparked and for God to begin to work in that. And so you have the stories like that. There are also kind of all kind of opportunities where what will happen is a youth group will go on a trip like this, and they begin relationship, and then they begin
with one another,
with the people that they're serving with, and then what can happen, I think, in the best cases, is true partnership happens. And so they say, why don't you come to our church, and why don't you come teach us a little bit about your life? And so we've seen some experiences like that too, where we've been able to invite pastors of other churches or other people in communities who are different than us in different settings and different, just to come up and talk about the reality of their life and the reality of their needs. And it's so humbling to have somebody who we think we should be praying for, oh God, give them more, have them say, don't pray that for me. Pray that I'll be able to minister in the midst of what God's put me in. Those kinds of things are humbling.
It reminds me of this last summer. We had opportunity to serve the parish home of Cedar Top Baptist here in Wilmore with a church that I've forgotten if they come. I think they came from Indiana, and they just had a wonderful time engaging and interacting with this predominantly African American church here in Wilmore, and then at the end of the week, they invited them over to the campground. We all had a meal together, and I got to meet their pastor for the first time and just hear from him, or those youth groups that have been coming on multiple years, and they'll reach out to a homeowner that they had worked with 3 years ago to come out and see them, and because they've been keeping up now on Facebook or whatnot over the years.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So those kind of partnerships move past there's a temptation, especially in the short term, to kind of put somebody in a box or, put on my mission hat for a week and care that way. But that longer term partnership allows us to enter that place where we see, really see, and we're seen. And then that kind of partnership allows us to have conversations about what really matters and what we can learn from each other. And those are the kinds of things where I think God really begins to move and shape communities in ways that are most formative and most reflective of the kingdom of God. Yeah.
What you're saying brings up a lot of different thoughts around youth ministry and one, even that story of that kid that went on the trip and was changed. We see so often, just not just vocationally, but these moments when groups do overnights, multi-day experiences where they're needing to be responsible, they're working really hard, and they're sharing really deeply. Oftentimes it might be the first time that they share about a personal struggle, and it's because they are doing multiple days side by side. That doesn't happen on a Wednesday night.
That's right. So when you're on a trip like that, you enter into these kind of relationships that become really formative and helpful, and you have opportunities then to have some of those deeper conversations. Teachable moments are great, but you don't know when they're going to happen. But the thing about these kinds of trips is because you're together, and you can be there when that kid, that moment hits, and he's like, oh, this is this person's reality, or I've always thought my life is better, but maybe not, and just having and being there right at those moments, and then having them be able to talk about those things and walk with them through how God's speaking to them and through them. Yeah, that's hugely important.
So you've been a youth minister for a generation or two, right? And you've seen it change, I imagine.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And I don't know, I feel like some of those changes are impacting the availability, the scheduling of our summers as more things get encroached. And what are some of the changes that you see in youth ministry for youth pastors to be aware of and to be responding to?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things is just understanding how much pressure young people feel, anxiety. We've heard all over the place. But I don't think unless you really have a really good conversation with a young person, you realize how deeply they feel all of that stuff. And so understanding that is a reality. It's a different day than when we were kids. And really even the students that I have who've only been out of high school for 2 or 3 years, it's a different day even than what they walk through. And so understanding the pressures young people feel every day from all over. And what that really means in terms of the church and youth ministry is, can we provide a place where they know they're cared for and that they're loved, and that there are opportunities for them to explore, like on a mission trip or things like that, opportunities to lead and giftings where they're not going to be judged and seen as a failure if they don't do something perfectly right.
Yeah, there's real performance anxiety sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Young people, and to give them chances to be empowered and practice and
Yes. So helping young people understand that they really are cared for. I can't say it enough, but young people don't believe, by and large, that adults care about them, really. So if you ask a young person how they're doing, they'll say fine, because they think that's what you want to hear. And you say, no, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
They'll say a little bit more, and then they think, okay, well, I'm done. Because they think that's all you really want. And what's important is to stay with that and to keep asking that. The 3 words that I tell people everywhere, parents, youth pastors, everybody, tell me more. Just repeat that to yourself. When somebody tells you one thing, tell me more. And it's amazing when you actually can get to that place that they know you care, how they will tell you more, and they'll tell you lots of things, and they want somebody to care for them in those ways. So I think in terms of the shifts in youth ministry, that's one of those places where you can really dig in. And again, experiences that are longer term, like a mission trip, and being in those kind of places, we're out of our comfort zone, opens up more conversations and opportunities for us to say that. Tell me more about that.
And it's uncomfortable for adults and chaperones to figure out how to ask that question, tell me more. You don't want the kid to feel more anxious that you're over probing or something like that. And but I like that idea of just figure out how to let them tell you more.
And the bottom line is, look, adults, we got to get over ourselves, and we got to be willing to ask. The truth is, young people are having deep conversations all the time, and they want to have those conversations, and they would actually like to have it with some of us, especially in the church. But we've got to be willing to ask and make a space where they can answer them and wrestle with things. And sometimes they're going to tell you, I have doubts about faith or church or life or whatever else. Well, we all do, but part of it's just making it okay for them to express that and to walk with them through that journey and committing to being with them in the midst of that. And so that's one of the huge shifts we're seeing. And I think I'm encouraged a lot by where I think a lot of churches are starting to go with that. One of the trends we're seeing, and this really ties in well with what you all do at Adventure Serve, but I think if we can begin to understand how much we can really invite young people to leadership, and how ready and willing they are to step into those things, the better off we are as a church, as the kingdom, and we're able to do things. And so tapping into young people's passion and their desire for justice. And they may not know what that means really, and they may not see all the pieces of that, and they may be uncomfortable even with the ways that shapes their life. But walking with them into that and having them, again, help us see those things can be really valuable. So there's nothing like an Adventure Serve trip, for example, where one of the big focuses, we're going to put the leadership on the young people, right? And on the youth on the trip. And so that gives them opportunities. And for a youth group, that's a great beginning spot. That's a snapshot of what young people can actually do. And so then you can go back to your youth group and say, I saw you lead a whole team for a whole day on this mission trip. I know you can do this one night, or help me with this retreat or whatever. So those, but getting into that commitment to letting young people lead, sometimes they're going to mess up. So do adults.
Yeah, it's sometimes very uncomfortable for our chaperones or our adults in the crowd to say, wait, so you're going to let them cook the dinner tonight? Or wait a second, so they're going to cut the drywall and measure it because we know how to do it.
Right.
No, we want them to know how to do it.
Yeah. And I say to they'll laugh and they'll say it to my teens in my church, but when we're doing mission trip stuff, I say, whose trip is it again? Yeah, it's our trip, But it's fun when they get to that spot where the young people are like, oh, get out of the way. This is our trip, not yours. And that's exactly it. I mean, and to be frank, that's what we need to do in the church as a whole as well. I mean, it's their church. It's not just
more
ours.
student-led worship services and shifted around.
Yeah, and just making them an everyday part of what we're doing. So they have skills, they have gifts, and come alongside them and help them come alongside you in the midst of things. I think we have an army of people who can do great work in the church if we're willing to tap into
because they're checking out otherwise.
Yeah.
If they aren't asked to step in, they're going to feel useless or apathetic, and they're just like, my voice doesn't matter.
My strongest belief, and this is grounded in developmental psychology and research and other things, but young people will lead. The question is where. And if we don't give them opportunities in the church, they'll find somewhere else to lead. And it might even be against the church. But so how do we make spaces for them? That needs to be one of our number one priorities, I think.
Another shift I've seen in youth ministry is more and more youth pastors recognizing their role as family ministries, that youth ministry is family ministry, and more churches reaching out to us and say, hey, do you do family trips, or multi-generational?
Right, sure.
Talk about what you've seen there and how that ties.
Yeah. Well, we know for sure that young people need physiologically, there's studies that tell us physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and as the church we would even say spiritually, need older people in their life. It's not a question, there's no doubt, they need them. Now, most of us, I mean, because we're human, we are attracted to people who are like us. And so young people do hang out with other young people, and adults hang out with adults. But one of the beauties of the church is it can be a place where those generations come together. And I'm telling you, one of the things that this generation needs more than anything else is to know there are significant adults who care for them and to provide places for them to serve, especially down a generation. So if you can find those ways where you can have teenagers being invested in by adults who then invest in younger children or middle schoolers or whatever, that model is, I mean, some of the best churches in America right now are doing those kinds of things. So we've got to figure those things out and invite people into that.
You know, just talking about this reminds me of how I remember being a younger person, even into college, where I was intimidated to start a conversation with an older person.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of felt like, well, it's on them to do this, right?
Yeah.
And now that I'm an adult, I go to church sometimes. I don't know the young people that well, and I sort of feel intimidated to walk over to their little circle, 3 or 4. Isn't it kind of funny how it's, and yet I'm supposed to be the more comfortable one, and it's a difficulty on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing youth ministry a long time, but still one of the most intimidating environments is to walk into a room of teenagers, or
I always find myself checking my fly and making sure like I get my own mindset of being in high school and looking like a dope.
And part of it is, they again don't think a lot of adults really want to be there, and so they know how to put the walls up. But it's not about being cool, or it's not about they don't care really what you dress. They might make fun of you, but they're gonna make fun of you anyway.
Yeah.
But it's really just about being there and just being willing to.
I really encourage my staff. If you don't know what to say or what to do, just sit near them.
Yep.
And sooner or later, that you're gonna start a conversation. They might start it, or you're just observing them and just being present beside them.
Yep.
And just being quiet is okay.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, just a couple other things, and we'll wrap up. Maybe from a theological perspective, why is it important to care for those on the margins?
Yeah. This is a huge issue, I think, and I think particularly in our country where we're so independent and so consumer-driven. We love to celebrate the strength that we have and talk about that. And we do that to God, too. We talk about Him as the Almighty God, and He is Almighty. But we sometimes lose sight of the other reality of God, that He is incredibly vulnerable. He's the all-vulnerable God. Here we are at Advent season, reminded again that He came as a baby, right? The most vulnerable of all places, and born in a, rested in a manger, like that. So part of what mission allows us to do, part of what being around people who are different than us allows us to do, is see that God. And experience Him up close and personal. and understand that God is everywhere, not just where strength is, where money is, where
amen. Wow.
but that God's right there in the midst of those kinds of places. And when we begin to see God that way, it changes everything. It changes everything about what we want to do, what we think is important, and it challenges so many things of the American kind of culture and consumeristic kind of
the power of vulnerability, and that Christ's message is a message of
And what's amazing is, a lot of times people in the midst of incredible suffering or pain will experience that God and can share that with us if we're willing to listen and be there. Again, that accompaniment piece, right? Just being with people. And it's amazing the kinds of, I know for me, the lessons I've been taught by people who are poor or somehow marginalized.
The level of gratitude, the level of what is my life? It's not my things. It is every day. It's food. It's
they have nothing, but they're willing to give it all sometimes. And here I am holding so tightly to all my many things, So I think theologically learning to see a God that's that God, and learning to see God in the midst of those situations is so important, because then we don't see ourselves as, I bring God with me to this mission trip, to this situation, or I'm going to talk to that homeless man that I pass on the corner, so I'll bring God to him. God's already there.
Just posturing yourselves, being almost saying, tell me about who God is from, and these people that I'm serving and serving alongside have something to offer me.
And the other side of that is to learn to understand that their struggle is our struggle, to see their pain is my pain. But I can't get there until I'm willing to see the all-vulnerable God who's in the midst of that situation. If all I'm doing is worshiping this all-powerful God, then I can never really see God in the midst of people. I just see a mission to accomplish, somebody that I've got to come and help. But when I begin to see God that way, then I begin to see, oh, wait a minute, their struggle is my struggle. And that's something I better be involved in. God's inviting me into something here that I can... That perhaps I have, he's inviting me to use some of what I've been given to help with this. But until we get to that spot where we see God's here in all of these places, then we're just missing it. So that's a big part of what I think the church needs to embrace, teach, and we need to be frank, ask for some repentance, some forgiveness on, because we often love to separate ourselves, but God's there, so let's be there too.
Love it. Any closing comments? Maybe books that have been great for you on this, or just suggestions to people in youth ministry or considering youth ministry as it relates to this issue? Sure.
Well, you mentioned that book, When Helping Hurts. I think it's a really helpful read for almost anybody in youth ministry or anywhere else to kind of get a hold of. And it just kind of wraps up some of those concepts and helps us see how sometimes even well-meaning folks can step on toes and do things the wrong way. But I think really important in this season is to think really well about who is your neighbor. If I can come back to that question and just ask God to open our eyes to see who's actually right around us. A lot of times we don't have to go very far. It's just opening our eyes and seeing what's right here. And then just being willing to pause long enough and have a conversation with somebody, to be present. And that's one of the things I'll just encourage people.
Yeah. Don't we all just love the story of the Good Samaritan, and then pull back further of what it was to be a Samaritan in that culture, that Samaritan in our culture, who is that Samaritan, and how far outside of who we think is right or wrong, or
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so learning to see neighbor is super valuable, and making that a commitment for our life, not just for a mission trip or for a week, but to do it. Yeah. And this season invites us into that in a really special way. Yeah.
Thanks for coming and talk. Thanks for the ways that you support ministers.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here and modeling incarnation by being right in the neighborhood. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.